What happens when revenge stops being sweet and starts seeping into your soul? Today's guest is PM Raymond, a New Orleans native whose debut collection, Things Are As They Should Be and Other Words to Die For, blends psychological horror with crime noir in stories where violence becomes part of the soil itself. Raymond is the winner of the 2024 Eleanor Taylor Bland Award, and her work has appeared in Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine, Dark Yonder, and numerous anthologies. This is the Dark Mind Podcast. If you enjoy the show, please support it by subscribing to my YouTube channel. Your support helps keep the dark conversation alive. So without further ado, I give you P.M. Raymond. PM, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining me on this 28th day of December 2025. I came across your work through the recommendation of Tamika Thompson, and with an endorsement like that, I knew I was in for a wild ride. From the opening pages, it was clear that this wasn't just another crime story with a few spooky elements, but a fully realized nightmare where history, family, faith, and revenge are all tangled together in ways that feel both mythic and uncomfortably real. The way you let women of color drive the narrative, claiming power, demanding payback, and then living with what that actually costs, gave the book a weight and sharpness that really stood out. So I really enjoyed the book and appreciate you joining me on the show today to discuss it.
Well, thank you. I'm glad that you liked it. It's been a passion project of mine for a couple of years. Trying to gather this many short stories is no small feat. And I'm pleased that you enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Well, jumping right into the title, when you chose the title, Things Are As They Should Be, what version of should were you interrogating? Social rules, family rules, spiritual rules, or something else?
I really wasn't thinking specifically about what should be, as opposed to each character's version of it. So whatever dilemma they find themselves in, whatever the outcome is as it should be. So That's really kind of what drove the narrative of a lot of the stories, is that, we make choices, and sometimes we got to live with those choices. And sometimes those choices on the surface can feel like we got away with something. But, from a deeper perspective, what does it do to your soul? What does it do to your conscience? How does it permeate the remainder of your life, if you will? And, I really thought about that a lot when I used to live in Missouri, and there's a place called Skidmore, Missouri, where a town bully basically was gunned down by people who they never really found who the killer was, but the whole town was kind of behind it. And one of the things they talked about in this town is that it's a very small town, probably a couple hundred people, that has had major violent acts happen in that one small town. They said, and one of the elders of the town basically said, this town has kind of brought this on itself, and that it's going to keep perpetuating this type of violence and kind of retribution, like it's in the soil. And that's kind of what I think about when I, write these stories about people who determine that they've been wronged or they want to make a right by committing a wrong. It kind of goes into your soul. It seeps into the soil. And some stories, literally, there is an evil in the soil. So, like it's very actual, I'm actually being more, literal in some of these stories, but that's really the concept.
Gotcha. Now, when you say bully, schoolyard bully or just somebody walking?
So this particular man, he was a violent bully. So the townspeople say he was actually out on bail from having an attempted murder on a shopkeeper there.
Mm.
He just consistently terrorized, basically.
Just kind of the town ne'er-do-well.
Yeah, I mean, more than that, because he was more than, again, this is how the story was told in the documentary, that he was more than happy to use violence to get his way. So this attempted murder on this shopkeeper wasn't the first time he tried to attempt to kill somebody in this town. And so I think they were just kind of fed up because the police weren't doing anything. He got out on bail. They just felt like no one was ever going to do anything about this person. It was really very much like a Wild West shootout. Like they were in the middle of town in the middle of the day. He was getting in his truck and the townspeople circled and just started shooting. I'm like, yeah, I mean, it was really like a showdown like that. Yeah. Yeah. Mm. And I'd heard about that story when I lived in Missouri, and it was quite the tale then. And this town was always kind of known for that. And then they had another situation where a woman who was pregnant was on one of those Facebook groups and befriended someone. And that person, unfortunately, had some psychological issues. And she had told people she was pregnant and she wasn't. And she went to that town, found that woman, and did the unthinkable.
Wow.
Another huge case that again, this town only has about 800 people in it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like the second large scale media event that happened there.
Wow.
I mean, it's crazy.
Skidmore, you said?
Yeah, Skidmore, Missouri.
Goodness.
Mm-hmm.
Well, kind of backing up a little bit to the title as far as what should means and how it relates to each individual character. Is it kind of a commentary on you can't control what happens to you, only how you react to it? And are you familiar with the concept amor fati? No. It basically Latin for love of fate. And some people subscribe to it in the sense that, yeah, you just have to deal with it and adapt and move along. And then some people say that you should embrace it and use it to your advantage. So I didn't know if some of the characters maybe took on the extreme version of amor fati and realized, hey, maybe I went a little too far.
Based on how you've described the concept, sure, that is probably what some of these characters have done. There's a word for it. I didn't realize it, but yes, that would probably be very apropos.
Yeah. Well, what kinds of people in this collection are more likely to say things are as they should be? The guilty, the protected, the exhausted, or the faithful, and why?
Yeah. So when I think about who is embodying that statement, I think of it as fate, right? So they are part of a circumstance, these characters, and it is really fate who's decided things are as they should be.
Yeah, I always get really agitated when people say, well, it's God's will, because I'm such a control freak. I just can't accept stuff like that. But you pretty much have to. It's kind of like you're a small elephant following a gigantic elephant and you're holding on to the tail. You can either get dragged or you can keep up enough to where there's slack and you just go along your merry way.
Yeah. Well, when you do make a good point that that does have again, like a fatalist type of, well, it was going to happen anyways. And God said, this is what's going to happen. I think that these characters, and, I hate to think of myself in this way, but I think we all have a little bit of this, that our righteous anger is, appropriate, and our righteous anger should be satisfied because it's righteous.
Yeah. Do you know who I am?
Yeah, exactly. And I think these characters, some of them have that type of anger in them where they're like, I'm justified. And maybe you are, but, you know, part of it is, and when I say fate, I don't mean fate in the sense of it's fated to happen, but I mean fate as the concept of a being. Fate will usher on to you whatever it is that is deemed appropriate for you.
Gotcha.
If you make a decision and it's wrong or it's bad. Although I think sometimes that fate doesn't always work the same way when it's something good. I think sometimes fate is really reserved as more of a cautionary tale as opposed to a reward, if that makes sense. And so these people, I don't want them to be necessarily rewarded for their behavior, but I want them to know that there is, for every action, there is a reaction. And sometimes you can't know what that reaction is going to be. You can't control what that reaction is going to be.
Do you feel like it's kind of like a choose your own adventure book? Like, I mean, obviously you shouldn't be surprised if you make a bad decision that bad things will happen. But do you ever feel like there's a couple of good reactions, but even some of those end up being horrific? Like there's really only one good reaction to every problem or every situation you're presented with in life?
I think it depends on how much of it you feel. Some people are okay with bad reactions.
Yeah.
Some people are okay. I mean, some people are okay with, you know, something, the outcome is not going to be positive. This is why you have people who, you know, it used to be called, you know, murder as a crime of passion. They know that there's probably a consequence after they do it, but they do it anyways.
Yeah.
They realize that's going to happen. So I think that's kind of the view that I take of some of these characters. They may know that there's going to be a downside, but they're willing to do it.
Yeah. Well, your pitch for the book name drops Blood Simple and Eve's Bayou. What did you want readers to feel in their gut that those references capture beyond plot or setting?
Mm-hmm. So because this collection, it absorbs a lot of psychological horror as well as crime noir, I felt like those two pitches, their essence of what they are, like if you've ever seen the movie Blood Simple, which I have seen a couple of times, and it's a really extraordinary film, especially for a first film. Because it's the colors are very saturated. It's very neo-noir. So the colors are very saturated. They're dark. There's double crossing that happens, and a lot of my characters end up getting double crossed when they didn't think they would. They thought they were smarter than everybody else, and that's kind of what happens in Blood Simple. And that's very much about relationships and control. And then with Eve's Bayou, that really speaks to my New Orleans background and what spiritual practices and root work was done and is done in certain areas of Louisiana, and how this family in particular, it's set in the 1960s. They are a Creole family, and how their use of that root work is actually used as a metaphor throughout the film, because the film opens with the woman recounting this summer in the 1960s. I can't remember exactly which year it was. And the opening line was, you know, this is a summer that I killed my father. So it's a very provocative line that opens the film. And she's 10. And, you know, what happens when, you know, family, generational trauma and secrets, and then how the use of the root work, which one of the characters, she's a practitioner and people come to her house, and this is very common, and she will, you know, give them some type of solace through that practice, and how some of her words when you look at them and how it's used through the film, she says one thing and you think you know how it's going to play out, and it does, but just not the way you thought it would. And that's the whole idea of when you're kind of messing with that type of work. You don't know how it's going to play out. You may ask for love, but you're not exactly sure what kind of love you're going to get. So, that type of thing. And that's what happened throughout that film. And I love that film. It's one of my favorite films. I think it's one of my go-to films when people want to know more about Louisiana. I feel like it really gives more of an accurate depiction of this type of work not being evil or good. It just is. And it just is a part of that fabric. And it's not meant to judge. It's not meant to judge at all. And so that film, that's why I kind of looked at both those films and how it kind of embodies the core themes of things are as they should be.
Gotcha. And not to go off into the weeds, but maybe just a little bit. When you mentioned neo-noir and oversaturation, it wasn't until I started getting into the video production of the podcast that I started learning about color grading and how the different directors, it's really weird how you would think, how did I not notice this before, that, like the entire picture is purple and pink, to indicate some sort of cyberpunk atmosphere,
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Well, crime noir usually asks who did it, while horror asks what's wrong with this place. In your interconnected stories, how do those two questions feed off of each other?
Yeah. So I think when I, started writing and finding my voice, I found that my voice was one in which characters are morally ambiguous already in horror. And I wanted my characters to have more agency than I shouldn't say what you would typically see in horror. Like you said, horror is about what's wrong with this place. Whereas neo-noir, people are making bad decisions. And I really wanted to emphasize the agency that these characters had in making those bad decisions and how those decisions can open up something that is, that they cannot control because it is of a different space and time than what they are accustomed to. So they kind of stumbled into it. And so that's, part of like the themes that are happening with these stories. So in a lot of ways, I don't separate noir from the horror because that's the voice that I write in. And that's the voice that I've become known for writing in. There's some people who are known for doing, extreme horror or for doing more commercially friendly horror, if you will. But I kind of fudge and blur the lines between the two to the point where I get a story published in a crime publication, even though it has a supernatural ending. They still saw the crime noir in it.
Yeah.
They were able to see that. And they know that it's a supernatural ending, but they chose it anyways, because they saw the crime and the noir happening in it.
Well, when it comes to that duality or those two things, crime noir characters talk themselves into ugly choices. In psychological horror, let's say, the mind punishes them for it. How did you decide which moments deserved noir logic and which deserved horror consequences?
So when I'm working on a story, I need to pick a lane to start with. So sometimes that story starts as a crime story, and it may evolve to having supernatural elements or elements that are not explained that could be supernatural. So I have a particular story that won the Eleanor Taylor Bland Award in 2024, and it's an award given by Sisters in Crime at the national level. And it's called A Nasty Business. And in that story, when I originally wrote it, it was actually for a contest, and I had certain keywords I had to use. And it just started out being a family who had a farm. And a lot of people don't know that in Louisiana, their number one crop is pine trees.
Really?
And so, yeah, I didn't know that till I started looking that up. So they own a pine tree farm. And one day I was watching, Reed Drummond has a cooking show, and I can't remember the Pioneer Woman. And they did this thing called Farm Olympics and had these cute little games that they played between the family. And I thought, what if it was a Farm Olympics that the family played where people died? So that's where that came from. And the story itself is about generational trauma. It's about passing this farm down and the way in which they do it. I never explicitly say in the story that it is a supernatural being. I let the reader decide that, but it is very clear that the soil, the land, this process has infused with this family to where you can't separate it. And that was a story that won that award. It was the first time a short story had won that award, because you can generally submit a short story or an excerpt from a novel that's unpublished. And it's the first time that a short story with a supernatural element of any work had ever won that award. So it was very clear that this was a crime story, but there was supernatural elements, but they were able to see the crime part. So it's hard to answer that question as to what comes first. It started as a crime story, and then sometimes the story just has its own, you hear writers say, my character decided to do this. And I used to think in my early stages of writing, that sounds crazy. It's so true. Sometimes your character just decides that's what it's going to do. And that story just decided that it was going to do it that way because it just worked really well for it. So yeah, it's hard to say what comes first. Like, how do I determine it? I do try to start out with a lane first. So it might start out as a horror story, but then might be a heist in the middle of it. But it started as a horror story, and it's going to probably end as a horror story, but yet there's going to be a crime committed in the middle of it.
Yeah, I wish, kind of piggybacking off of your statement about the characters doing something and the writer doesn't know why. I wish they did some research. Like, neuroscientists are always putting EEGs on people and seeing what's happening in the brain when they're doing A, B, and C. Like, I would love to know which parts of the brain light up when those unconscious processes are working, where you consciously don't understand what's happening from this subconscious space. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, circling back to the book, New Orleans functions as a character with its own moral weight. How does this city's specific history dictate the types of violence that occur in these stories?
So New Orleans in general is kind of known for its kind of laissez-faire attitude. People are kind of laid back. Someone asked me once, do you like city or, country or rural? And I said, I'm from New Orleans, so I like a city that's completely laid back. And, it's definitely a city. It's very laid back. New Orleans is also known for just its eccentrics that live there, the partying. It has a certain type of, when you say New Orleans, what people think of, they think of Mardi Gras, and they think of Voodoo, and they think of above ground cemeteries and things like that. I think when I don't know if I necessarily attribute New Orleans itself to, the type of violence that happens there, but I think because it is an environment in which almost anything can happen, it leaves open a door for almost any behavior to happen. So you really don't have to temper, if you will, the type of behavior your characters have, because New Orleans is kind of known for that, even though that is false. You cannot do just anything you want to in New Orleans. You will get arrested. But it has that atmosphere that people think of. So when I'm thinking of, with my stories, what type of chaos is going to happen, my mind is wide open. So, because almost anything can happen. So, I don't really, I don't think so much of New Orleans as defining the type of violence, but it allows me to explore all types of manners of chaos that I'm looking to do, as opposed to, say, if you're in a rural town, it limits the little bit of what you can, what kind of chaos you can cause, based on the landscape and the surrounding area. Whereas New Orleans, really almost
Unless you're in
anything goes.
Skidmore.
Unless you're in Skidmore, this is true. Well, even in Skidmore, in New Orleans, you would never have a posse come outside of a bar and shoot people.
Yeah.
It's like, that could only really happen in a small town.
Yeah.
Where everybody keeps everybody's secrets.
Yeah.
So there's just certain things that, I think New Orleans as a city, because of what it stands for, it's, you have a broader scope of what you can imagine.
Well, you alluded to it earlier. In modern cinema, you always hear about voodoo as involving voodoo dolls and casting hexes. And I was informed by a previous guest that is actually hoodoo, that voodoo is a monotheistic religion. So can you talk a bit about voodoo and how it informs your stories?
Yeah. So I'm so glad you asked that question, because I do love to talk about that subject. So first of all, voodoo is a kind of amalgamation of West African traditions as well as Catholicism, right? Hoodoo is a magical practice, and that is kind of where root work falls, using roots to cure things, to conjure, if you will, certain outcomes. But voodoo, and there's also, not to get too deep in the woods, there's also Louisiana voodoo. So there's voodoo, Louisiana voodoo, or sometimes called New Orleans voodoo, and there's Vodou. So Vodou is what the actual pronunciation is. If you are from West Africa, it's called Vodou, and then it came to, through slavery, through stateside, then it became voodoo. And then Louisiana has its own kind of take on voodoo. So having said all of that, I do find that people attribute voodoo to being either good or evil. So this polarity that there's, you can cause people to be evil. You can use it for evil. You can use it for good, which is not true. It's a religion, and that's not how it's set up. And I actually did an article earlier this year in Dread Central, and it's called Deconstructing the Skeleton Key: How the Skeleton Key Depicts African American Beliefs, and naming 3 films that do it better. And one of them is Eve's Bayou. So that, because when you have voodoo set up, say, in cinema or in literature, and you get one view of it and it's evil or it's good, like in Skeleton Key, it is very much seen as an evil entity. It's an evil practice that brings about destruction and something bad. Yes, that's the one. And so throughout that article, I talk about how voodoo is actually a religion. It was also meant to keep enslaved people, as well as people who, once Reconstruction happened, it was a way to keep people safe. It was also a way for them to practice their religion covertly, to keep some of their West African practice them covertly with the guise of Catholicism, if that makes sense. Use that as your shield, and then you're able to use that to practice. But that's really what voodoo is. It is a religion. It is recognized as a religion. Hoodoo is not technically. And then, like I said, there's like 3 different versions of voodoo that happen. So we don't have enough time to get into all of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just simply put, as far as voodoo and hoodoo is concerned, voodoo is a religion, and then there's kind of a mysticism that some people like, kind of like Judaism and Kabbalah, sort of.
Yeah, I'm going to assume that would be the case. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not sure about Kabbalah, what that means. But yeah, I know what
Well,
Judaism is.
I've heard of it referred to as Jewish mysticism.
Okay. Well, then
And
yes, hoodoo would be some type of, it is. Yeah. It's magic. It's mysticism. It's, it's not meant to be, they don't have a deity system. They don't have spiritual practice system the way you do in voodoo, where you've got spirits and saints and things along those lines.
yeah. Well, the concept of home in Southern Gothic often feels like a trap. For the characters in this collection, is home a place of safety they've lost or the very thing they need to escape?
Mm-hmm. So, Southern Gothic, this is such an interesting question because home is a place that you generally retreat to for solace and for safety. Whereas in Southern Gothic work, and I would say in my work as well, home is a place that you're being pulled back to. You thought you had escaped it. No, you're being pulled back to it. So the rationale, I guess, behind what home means is more skewed because it's not meant as a refuge. It's meant as almost like a punishment if you come back here. And I find that happens a lot in Southern Gothic work. Home is a place that you get pulled back to. You were out of it and then you're back in it. And if you're still there, you've lost the will to escape from it.
And there's so many storylines where they have to go back because one of their parents is on their deathbed.
Yes.
Just have them sent here.
Yes, there's always and yes, you're right. I was actually thinking about that. It's always your guilt at not, participating with your ancestors is one of the typical reasons to be pulled back to a home in Southern Gothic work. And, that might be, Louisiana is a very Catholic area. And so religion might have something to do with why there's that kind of underpinning, that type of sentiment in the work, that you feel guilty if you don't cherish your ancestors and, bend to their will, basically. But yeah, I find that Southern Gothic, especially, like I said, in the stories that I write, it's pulling you back into something that you thought you were out of.
Well, what role does silence play in your stories, both as a weapon and as a form of resistance?
When you say silence, do you mean the things that are unspoken or actual literal silence?
No. Unspoken. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I should have been more clear.
Okay. Aren't we all kind of like that? Like we, as humans, tend to skirt around the issue when if maybe you were more direct or just said your piece, that would avoid some of the conflict and some of the chaos that happens. And I would say that that's kind of happens in these stories, the unspoken. And some of it I do say with the unspoken is like, for example, in the entitled Life and Untimely Death of King Booker, set in the 1960s, you've got basically a player who got married into a very formidable crime family who he wants to take over the family. He wants to do that using violent means. The unspoken here is that he feels like he's the man of the house, therefore he deserves to have this, even though he never actually says that out loud. He makes it seem like, I want this family. I have a master plan to make this happen. I'll pick up all of the rackets. And the very common rackets of the 60s were, gambling and that type of thing. And he never comes out and says really that he's very insecure. It's like he's a very insecure person because he married this woman who comes from a much better position than he was in. And instead of being like, oh, I now get to be a part of this, he's like, no, I didn't build this, but I feel like I deserve this. And really it just comes down to insecurity. If I'm looking at, say, the Pied Piper Presage, so that's set out in the swamps of Louisiana at an indeterminate time, near future, near past. And you've got this older man who has kind of just been pretty much, I wouldn't say poor per se, but just never had really a lot of things. He comes into possession of something that now makes him very sought after. What he's really saying is, I've always felt invisible and now I'm not. And that's what really spurs him on. And that's the unspoken thing that drives him. And it's the thing that's going to be his destruction.
What would you say is the loudest silence that hangs over these characters?
It's selfishness. Like, these characters are selfish individuals. You have to be selfish to do some of these things. You're not just entitled and you're not just feeling self-important. You're very selfish. And that really selfishness, and I would say greed, but I think greed is another form of selfishness, and envy is another form of selfishness in a way. And a lot of these stories, they speak to envy and greed, and it's really just another form of selfishness. That would be I would say that's the theme besides New Orleans that ties these stories together, is that there's very selfish individuals here.
Well, what does revenge promise in your world? Or actually, what does it promise people at first? And which of those promises tends to be a lie?
Yeah, so it promises them, they think freedom to do as they want, freedom to have what they want, freedom to be the person they think that they are. But revenge in these stories, as I think in real life, just brings destruction, moral destruction, physical destruction. It's just, you don't win. I don't know. You just don't. You don't win when it comes to revenge. You think you do momentarily. You think you have control, but it's momentary, what you think you've gained. I guess I'm also kind of which might seem out of the ordinary, but I do, I go to church every Sunday. Like, I'm a faith practicing person, and I just don't feel like revenge is really worth your eternal soul. But some people do, some people have no problem with that. So.
Yeah. Yeah. My problem is, and I guess I'm not speaking so much revenge as just the expression of anger. That's kind of, I guess, like the beginning stages of revenge. It feels so good in the moment, but it's almost like it's a drug, because immediately after there's this hangover, like this emotional hangover where you're like, oh, I lost control. I'm a grown man acting like a 5-year-old. It's just, you just feel dirty.
Yeah. Yes, for sure. Mm-hmm.
Well, in a revenge-driven story, escalation can become addictive. How did you keep escalation feeling emotionally true rather than just louder and bloodier?
I think my stories are more grounded as opposed to being more like fantasy or fantastical. So the escalations felt, at least this is what I was trying to do, they felt more real world. They felt more like that, they felt more approachable because you could see that happening. And at some point you need to resolve the escalation. So where do you resolve it? I think it just really depends on where the story is leading. What's the logical conclusion? What's the, I try not to write words for the sake of writing words to make a word count. Sometimes, I have certain stories that are only about 1,500 words. That's all it needs, for things to escalate and then to be resolved. Some stories, I have a story in there, I think that's like almost 8,000 words. That's what it took, to get it there. But again, it's going to be more grounded in reality as opposed to anything that would be, considered too much in the realm of fantasy, like fantasy revenge. You see those stories where it's almost like an action movie. You're like, that just you're there just for the popcorn of it, because there's no way in real life anything could ever happen like that and go down like that. And no one could sustain that level of energy like that. I mean, it's just, you know that it's not in any way meant to be real. Whereas in my stories, I'm hoping that the escalations feel measured, feel accurate in terms of what came before it. So you're not taken out of the story, and that it resolves in a way that makes sense. Does it mean that it resolves in a way that is good? It's just in a way that it makes sense.
Well, you alluded to it earlier, alluded to yourself as being, I believe you said a God-fearing woman, correct?
I said I'm a woman of faith.
Woman of faith. I'm sorry. Woman of faith. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
And that revenge isn't worth your eternal soul. So I'm assuming you have some very strong beliefs when it comes to revenge. If someone walked away from your collection with one insight about revenge, what would you hope that insight to be?
So, okay, for clarity, I feel like people have free will and can do whatever they want. So I'm not here to tell people that, I have this moral high ground.
Yeah.
I'm just here to say that that's kind of, for me personally, I don't think that revenge is worth that. But what I want people to take away from this is being able to vicariously live through that revenge. Like maybe they have a situation in which they're like, oh, I wish I could really, get the last word on that one. And that maybe this book is just an opportunity for them, kind of like that popcorn movie, that action movie that's way over the top. This is just an opportunity for them to explore those feelings. And that's really kind of what horror in, any of the darker genres, like noir is one of the darker genres as well. It's a way for people to vicariously have those feelings, read those feelings, and just be able to have fun knowing that they aren't going to ever have those repercussions. They're not ever going to have to make those choices. It's just meant to be that window where they can see themselves and then you move on with your day.
Gotcha. Well, in the segregated world of your story, The Entitled Life and Untimely Death of King Booker, where open confrontation can be suicidal, what forms of agency interest you most? Patience, strategy, community leverage? And how do you dramatize them without romanticizing the constraint?
Mm-hmm. So I think any form of agency during that time in our history is of interest to me, right? And, one of the things that I did before I wrote this story is I have a ton of family members who lived during that time. So, I would talk to them about what was the popular restaurants and where did you guys go and, things like that. And learned about the civil rights movement during that time when they were probably like teenagers or young adults. And, I also have an uncle, his name is George Raymond, and there is a documentary called George Raymond, Thirst for Freedom, that talks about his work in the civil rights movement. And so I spoke with that producer, his name is Will Kelly. And so I've actually had an ongoing dialogue and relationship with him. And his goal is to uncover like the unsung heroes that we don't really hear as much about during the civil rights movement. And one of the really interesting things he told me is that my uncle George was in New York, and he sent my, grandparents this letter, just kind of letting them know, how he was and what he was doing. And it was on stationery from James Baldwin. He was hanging out with James Baldwin. He's actually, yeah. So, I mean, I've heard all these stories. So one of the ways that I guess one of the things that I do to make sure that I'm not romanticizing, but more dramatizing that time period is I'm using those stories. So the things that I wrote about in that particular story that you just mentioned, The Entitled Life and Untimely Death of King Booker, those are real world things. And I tried to position them as, this is just his world. This is his life. If you had a nice car back then, that you could be signaled out for that because you have a nice car and someone who does not look like you does not have one. And then there's that, that violent jealousy that comes with that. And so taking back roads and knowing where you could drive. That's why there's a green book, unlike the movie that we will not talk about. The Green Book was actually a book that helped Black travelers stay safe. Where could they eat? Where could they stop for gas? What were sundown towns? Those are all things that was normal. That was a part of their normal life. So I wanted to present it in that way, not in a sensational, but this is what it was like back then. And to not mention it, that would be false to the story and the narrative, to not mention this is how they conducted, their daily life, because this is how you stayed safe.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the John Hughes Guide to the High School Girl Transformations, you take a relatable experience like hair texture and push it into body horror. How do you decide when a real-world frustration has enough teeth to become a genre story?
Mm-hmm. I really any real world. I've read so many different horror stories just based on, a piece of jewelry.
Mm-hmm.
I think anything can be if you put the right lore behind it. And in this case, I feel like there's always comments about women's bodies, and that starts when they're young, right? And then, you have this girl who has different texture here. And, that was me in middle school or in high school. I didn't have the same, hair that, my hair didn't feather and it didn't do all this other stuff that other people's hair did. So that's one of the major visual differences that girls will see, even if you are, say, a white girl who has curly hair and everybody else has straight. You're going to be singled out as being different. And that's really, unfortunately, it's a common occurrence to have that type of, scrutiny put on, young girls and young women, that it, for me, the thing about hair was very relatable to me. And I just kind of felt like, oh, that was something that I, experienced. I didn't get teased for it in this case, like this, how I wrote in the story, but I know people who did. And that's why I kind of wrote that story for all those girls who back in high school would have liked to have a little bit of revenge on someone. And this way they can read vicariously about maybe getting a little bit of that.
Gotcha. Well, I'm incredibly dense for some reason when it comes to remembering POVs in books I've read. In your story, Adventures in Babysitting, you use the second person POV, you, like me being addressed. And I'm trying to think if I have read a book in that POV. Now, I probably have. Like I said, I'm very dense in recognizing stuff like that. But how did that choice change the way you wanted the reader to feel about their own complicity in the unfolding events?
Mm-hmm. So you are correct in that the second person POV is very uncommon. It's rarely used. It's really hard to use it for an entire book. Like I said, there's like one or two books that I know of that have done it. So when I looked at this story, it wasn't second person POV. It was, I think, maybe first person. Like I was doing this and I was doing this. Whereas with second person, it makes the reader the main character, makes the reader the protagonist, because I'm saying you see, look out your window and you see something happen. I think it works better in short stories. And there's actually a collection called Hark the Herald Angels Scream, where a story uses second person, and it does a fantastic job with it there as well. So when I, went to use it, I did it really just to do something different. And then as I started writing it, so there's an escalation happening here in this story, right? The escalation of what you thought you knew and then what you start to think you know. And And I started writing it, and it actually informed the way I wrote it, because it started becoming really kind of eerie, because when you are the you in the story, it feels more visceral, right? It feels like you are in danger while you're reading it. Like you can feel the danger of that character because the character is you, if that makes sense.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, that was like such a fun story to write. And it's one of my, my go-to stories that people do ask me about. And when I wrote it, I was not discouraged in writing it in second person. I got this, it's really hard to write in that. And, a lot of people, they don't, that's why people don't use it. They don't really get it. They don't, it's hard. And I wrote that story and said, you know what? I'm going to send this off to a contest. So I sent it off to the Fierce Gazelle. They had a Halloween contest. And what they do is they get all of their submissions. And then the week before Halloween, they announce 2 finalists. I got an email saying I was a finalist. I was like, what? I didn't win, but I was a final. And it was one of those things where I just took a chance on writing second person. And it's one of my favorite stories. And the thing is, I don't know if I can actually recreate doing something again in second person, because this one, just the concept worked. Everything about when I was writing it worked. And it's really one of those, for me, one of those special stories that are in my collection.
Gotcha. Now, I read about you doing film reviews for killer shorts. Now, is that something in the past, or are you still doing that?
Yeah, I just had one released last week. Okay, it was a Halloween version.
Okay, because I was looking, is it from your website here or from the Killer Shorts?
You can go to killershorts.com. Oh, you can go to my website as well. I post them there as well. If you go to the blog, like there should be a blog tab at the top.
Blog, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, the last Christmas. That was the last one that I just did.
Okay. And so these are the full length.
I do partial so that you can go to the website and read the rest of it. I do the first part of it.
Well, I mean, as far as the movies, are these, I'm going to have to admit my ignorance. I don't watch movies very much. So The Last Christmas, is this a short film or a feature?
Yes. All of the reviews that I do are for short films, for killer shorts. I occasionally do full length, like I did one for Good Boy. That just came out. But for killer shorts, these are short film critiques, and I usually do them from a academic or thematic lens. So you're not going to ever hear me say, I didn't like this film. I'm going to tell you about the film and I'm going to tell you about what resonated, including their cinematography, including the acting, including the concept. I'm going to, go into depth in that way. It's not really a critique as much as it is like film analysis or criticism.
Killer Shorts, is that kind of like Alter in a way?
They do have a relationship with Alter, I think with Shudder. They're actually out of Canada, and they are kind of like a premier horror media repository. So they do the reviews. So I do reviews for them, but they also primarily run a competition for screenwriters and for short stories, which is how I got involved with them, because 3 of my stories have placed in their competitions. And then when that happened, I started going more to their website and noticed they had a blog and they had a call for writers. So I said, oh, well, I mean, I write and it's nice for my portfolio. This is how I actually got into screenwriting, because the more I watched films and looked at how they were done, the more I became interested in writing them.
Well, so is there a specific mistake that you see filmmakers make that you actively try to avoid in your own prose?
Yeah, I think so I watch a lot of short films before I even get to one that I want to review. Because what I find most commonly is that either the ending doesn't make sense based on everything that you presented to us of these characters, their motivations, and how they behave. And then you do something completely it's almost like, I just need to finish this up. And then you just like throw an ending on there that makes no sense.
I only have
Um,
this building for one more day. I got to make this.
that's what I'm thinking. Like, I
Yeah.
just, so that happens. And that comes from, I think, not having a script that is tight. So that's one of the big things that I see that take me out of a short film. And then I'm like, I'm not going to review this one. Because I'm also trying to review films that give people an idea of what good looks like. I think there's a ton of films that are terrible. You could do a review site that only talked about terrible films, but that doesn't really help anybody, you
Yeah.
know? And I also know that it takes a lot of effort, energy, time, and money, even to make a terrible film. So I also don't feel it's my place to, define someone's value in my review, if that makes any sense. And there's a whole debate right now about the state in the future of criticism and whether or not people can write bad reviews about a book or about a film, and that we're in the influencer era where, everything is good and, we don't say anything bad about anything. I get that. But I know how hard it is to write something. So for me as a writer, I feel like that is not something that I want to do to somebody else.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to need some help here. You have a background as an IT project manager and a Scrum Master?
Yeah. So do you know what a Scrum Master is?
No.
So Scrum comes from the rugby term for a scrum, like a team. And in IT, you'll have a team of developers working on a project, and it's meant to be done with several iterations, and that each of the iterations are usable. And so you put a Scrum team together. So I'm the Scrum Master over those IT people. I don't tell them what to do. I just make sure that they don't have roadblocks in their way. It's the product manager who tells them what it's supposed to look like. That's not me. That's not my role. My role is to make sure that as they are doing their iterative work, that they don't have stakeholders that have no business asking questions, and stakeholders coming in and saying, oh, do this. And it's like, no, that's not a part of the work for this next 2 weeks. You're taking them off track. I'm there to take those roadblocks out of their way and to make sure that they're managing their time efficiently.
Nice. Well, I read that you make it a point to try a different format every year. Screenplays, poetry, or even writing in French. What is a specific creative muscle you've built for forcing yourself into a format where you aren't the expert?
So yeah, actually, I'll use the example of screenwriting because that's something I did this year. And to back up, one of the reasons I'm doing it is I want to be able to adapt my own work.
Okay.
Because I've seen how writers are like, the movie gets made and they're like, oh, I hate that film. And Stephen King is famous for that, right?
Oh yeah. He hates, I think him and, God rest Kubrick's soul, but I think they hated each other.
Yeah. So you have this idea that, if you are the writer, you're handing your baby off to someone else. And you have other writers who are very pragmatic about the idea of it. They're like, the book is the book, the movie is a movie. And if they do something crazy with it, it's their movie. I'm not concerned about it. I'm in between. So I feel like I would love to be the person who could adapt my own work. And then if they wanted to take that work and tweak it, I'm fine with it, as long as they understand what the work is meant to be. And so that's why I started doing screenwriting. So this year I did that, and I thought, okay, I've never done this before. So I started reading a bunch of scripts. I joined organizations that specialize in it. It specialize in screenplays and things like that. And then I said, okay, I'm going to take one of my stories and adapt it. And I'm going to adapt it in time to submit it to a competition. So I'm learning and I'm going to do this, and it's going to be fine. And I'm just so lucky to have screenwriters who I'm friends with who've actually sold screenplays, who have placed really well in competitions and won competitions. So they really know what they're doing. And I think both of them may have went to school for it, but I'm not exactly sure. But my writer friend, Casey Stegman, amazing crime writer. I think he's got a book that's going to be coming out soon. And then Kelly Asher, who I met through screenplay competitions. They have both been a wealth of information, telling me things like when they get my script, they both said, script writing is so different from story writing because you are expected to have basically less words, more emphasis on the actual actions happening, not a bunch of flowery language. Well, when I first adapted my first work, they both said, you got to trim the language. It's going to make you look unprofessional. They both said that same thing. So I went back and started reading more scripts and looking at that and understanding what that meant. And so that's been a learning curve, but I submitted my screenplay last night and we'll just see what happens. I have no high hopes that I'm going to get anywhere near placing in this competition. But I am looking forward to the feedback that I'll get from it and that'll help me improve over next year. So that's, for me, I just feel like it's really important to be able to have control of the pipeline of your work. So that would mean, writing screenplays. That means if it was to be optioned, making it in the contract that I'm at least some kind of producer. I want to have control over what happens, even if there's changes to be made that I'm open to. I wouldn't want someone to completely misinterpret my work, especially because it's work about women of color. I don't want people to do that. And not all my work is about women of color, but in particular, that's one of the things that I'm concerned about.
Yeah. Robert Allen Dilts. Yeah. He is one of the first people I had on my show. It was a long time ago, but he wrote the screenplay for a movie called What Josiah Saw.
Oh, yeah. I've seen it.
Holy shit.
That movie is crazy. I love that movie, by the way. It's so good.
Mm-hmm. So I had him on the show and I was like, you know what? I loved the movie and I wanted to interview the man that wrote it, but I got to be honest with you, I've never read a screenplay. He's like, what would you recommend? And he sent me the screenplay for Seven. And I forget who wrote that, but man, I read that. I was like, okay. Cause when I thought screenplay, I was like, man, isn't it just a script? Like some boring, this person says this person says that, but it's actually just this tightly, beautifully, like, I just can't describe it. I think screenplays, written in format, not just, something that somebody's freehanding just to go along and make a movie with their friends. I mean, like the official format you have to submit, well done, is just a beautifully structured piece of art. Like, yeah,
they have all kinds of formatting things, which is what I didn't know from the beginning. And they both told me, they're like, get this software. And so I actually have screenwriting software to do the formatting for me. And now everything, and it really does. Reading a really good script, like I have the script for Clone Tyrone, which is one of my favorite movies. I think it came out the year before, but it's very Afro-futuristic, magical realism, and it was on Netflix. And reading that script, I was like, I can see it's like all the bonkers stuff that was in the film. I'm reading it in a script format. And that's been really interesting to read that type of script, and some of the other ones that I've been lucky enough to get a hold of. I also have some episodic scripts because I'm writing more film scripts, but I'm also thinking there might be some concepts for television shows. So you're writing episodic scripts, and that's probably going to be different than writing something for a film.
Well, you mentioned one of the things with script writing, your book's being adapted, so you want to have some sort of creative control via writing the script yourself, especially if it's something that involves women of color. And I read that you advocate for writers to, quote, refuse to sanitize their cultural voice for editors. Can you describe a moment when protecting your voice felt like a legitimate professional risk? Or has that ever happened?
I'm going to say that has not happened thus far. But what I will say is that I have writer friends who, like, if the dialogue is more rural, or I have a really good writing friend. Her name is Ashley Ruth. Bernier, and she is from the U.S. Virgin Islands. So she's from a Caribbean area, and their dialect, their food, just the way that they say certain things is going to be very different. And she actually had someone say, "You're using too much dialect." She's like, "But this is set in the Virgin Islands." Like, so and she was like, "Okay, well then I guess I'm going to, withdraw this story. Because it doesn't, I can't write something that's authentic if I'm not allowed to use my voice." And I think, she's a woman of color. And so I think that's really sums up my attitude as well. If you don't like, certain dialect that is used, then this is not the right story for you. It is still the right story for me to write. And I'm not going to change the dialogue because you're uncomfortable with it. And that's really what I believe that person was saying to her. I don't feel comfortable with this because it's not, something that I'm used to. Therefore, in order for me to not be uncomfortable, you need to change you. And she's like, "I'm not doing that." And I completely agree. And that is my stand.
Is there anything that says you can't have like a glossary for people that aren't familiar?
Generally, if you're a good writer, which Ashley Ruth is, you put it into context when it's in the story. And she's also in my critique group. So sometimes I will say, I don't understand the context for this particular term. Could you put it more in context? And then she'll be, okay. And then she'll change it so that it's more in a context. And, again, you see this a lot with writers of, not just writers of color, but writers from other, just diverse backgrounds. Diverse, I don't know if that's a dirty word anymore or what, but people have different backgrounds, different experiences, might be rural, might be, from a different country. And that comes through in their writing. And if you're uncomfortable by that, then just don't read the book. Like, no one's forcing you to read this. So move along.
But as you said, it's not like it's stuff. It's not like it's things that you couldn't figure out. It's in context.
Yes, generally it's in context. Or I honestly don't mind looking up a word or two, but I don't know. I just don't mind doing it. Like sometimes I'll use French words in my story and okay, I expect you to look it up if you don't know what it is and you can't figure out the context. I'm not here to hold your hand through that. And I think and this actually goes back to filmmakers and what are big mistakes. One of the big mistakes, I think, with filmmakers and with writers is when you don't trust your reader or you don't trust your audience. And so then you have to feel like you have to implicitly tell them something. I don't think there's any spot in my story where I feel like I don't trust my reader to figure out the context of something or to figure out that, the Easter egg from 3 pages ago relates to this. Like instead of having to say, "Oh, by the way, that thing that happened before," and then they have to restate it. I trust my readers.
Gotcha.
And I think that's something that people need to do more of.
Well, would you like to read a passage from your latest collection?
Yes. So I am going to go with Adventures in Babysitting. That's one that people always seem to think that they like hearing. So we're going to go with that one. Alrighty, let me put my glasses on for this one. Okay, so Adventures in Babysitting. October 25th. A fiery red Pinto roundabout maneuvers into the driveway across the street. The gleam from its rail bumper refracts the sunlight like the North Star. You watch this new arrival and mentally compare it to Sebastian Stewart's invitation to show you his penis behind the Prentice High School basketball bleachers. Intriguing? Sure. But in the end, nothing to see here. As the car comes to a stop, the hatchback window reveals the silhouette of a full dome of hair haloing the driver's seat headrest. A shadow of movement flits from the passenger side. Peeking through a sliver in the curtains, you observe a slender woman slink out of the driver's seat. Her ebony frame is swathed in a paisley halter dress. Her thick, jet black hair styled with voluminous curls that only pink, cushiony rollers could create. The passenger door swings open with a flare, and a little girl barrels out. Her hair is parted into 2 afro puffs, a staple of most little girls in this neighborhood. The patches on her bell-bottoms are placed strategically to cover the telltale signs of roughhousing. This tiny but mighty storm in a teacup runs across the unkempt lawn, zigzagging under the late afternoon sun, then stops on a dime. Your grasp on the curtain tightens. Your eyes squint in disbelief. Is that cheeky little kid staring at you? Her body squarely faces in your direction, eyes lock. She raises her index finger towards you with a slow, come-closer wag. You swish the fabric panels shut. Your mother calls you to dinner and mentions that Mrs. Brownstone and her daughter Lila just moved in across the street. She states you should go over and inquire about babysitting before that Carlo Rayford down the street beats you to it. You're intrigued by the pint-sized finger pointer, so you promise to stop by tomorrow. October 26. You approach the Brownstone house. You better secure that babysitting gig, or your mother will trip a fit, and you'll never be able to get that new Jackson 5 album, not with your current savings. Lila is jumping rope. The soft thump of her patent leather shoes as they hit the cement driveway is like a metronome. You say hello and introduce yourself. Her charcoal eyes grab you, thump, thump, mesmerize you. Without warning, on such a clear, breezy day, a sour tang bubbles from your stomach and fills the back of your throat. You didn't feel nauseous until this very moment. Is your mother home? You squeak out. Lila declares Penny is inside. You aren't sure which is more disconcerting, the fading sensation you were on the cusp of vomiting, or a child using their mother's first name. Lila's lanky legs bip and bop as she lingers on you. Her shadow elongates, and you find it strange that Lila's jump rope handles cast a shadow that morphs her little hands into claws. You shake your head as the door opens and turn to greet Mrs. Brownstone. Lila scrapes past you as you complete your due diligence on the babysitting front. Mrs. Brownstone desperately needs after-school care, and she was not at all impressed with that Rayford girl's attitude. You negotiate $3 an hour. Just as you're counting your babysitting chickens before they hatch, you hear the commotion of movement in the background. With one hand, Lila is moving a chair, and with the other, you see furry feet and a plump midsection dangling under the other arm. A grayish-brown bunny squirms as she sets it down on the floor. Oh, great. Pets. As you turn to leave, Mrs. Brownstone stops you and asks if you're free to take Lila trick-or-treating later that week. I know a pretty girl like you has all sorts of trouble to get into, but it would be a big help. You wonder if Sebastian will be out trolling with his skateboarder friends that night. Maybe you'll run into him. The bleachers weren't so bad, and Lila would be a good cover story, so you say yes. As you turn to leave, you hear Mrs. Brownstone gasp. Lila stands in the hallway, a mint green Tupperware bowl cradled in her small hands. Whatever's in the bowl sloshes around in a dark ruby liquid. As Lila moves closer, a stench percolates to the front porch. You reel from the odor, a mix of spoiled chicken and cough syrup, burying your face in the armpit of your tie-dye shirt. Mild cramps jumble in your stomach. Not this again. Mrs. Brownstone shrugs her shoulders in embarrassment, the universal shrug of kids get up to the darndest things, then sternly rebukes her daughter. Lila Dorothea, put that back in the kitchen. She apologizes for the outburst and offers you an extra $2 an hour for Halloween. You say absolutely. Embarrassment can be lucrative, and who are you to turn it down? Lost in thoughts of money, 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 you cross the peculiar neighbor's lawn, which has browned quite a bit since yesterday. As you step off the curb, you hear the squeal before you see the thick smoke from burning rubber. Mr. Cochran's wood panel station wagon rocks to a standstill, his cursing continuing after the car stops. He nearly walks straight into his front bumper in an early grave. You better take care of yourself so you can take care of me, Lila murmurs seemingly in your ear. You heave in a gush of air, the shock widening your eyes. You whip around to see the little girl skip across the parched grass to Mrs. Brownstone, erect like a centurion, at the front door. October 27. You try not to judge. What do you know about kids? Teenager or not, you're still too young to cast aspersions, but you sense Mrs. Brownstone must have her hands full, especially with a strange child like Lila. In fact, on the first day of childminding, Lila begs you to watch a magic trick that she's been working on for years. Years? Her soft, cool hands take yours. In her cotton candy pink bedroom, filled with porcelain dolls that sport an eternal scream in their eyes, she murmurs indistinct syllables and vowels, a secret language presumably shared by first graders and their clans. Lila demands you close your eyes as she tugs your hand forward. A rush of wind swirls and encompasses your palm, prickling your skin. No other part of your body is subjected to the tactile gust. What are you doing? Your lids flutter, but remain clamped shut like a superglued blindfold. Panic explodes in every nerve, nourishing your body with a spiraling alarm. Your eyes finally open, just as a saucer-sized black portal sucks Lila's Madame Alexander, Little Red Riding Hood doll straight into it, then closes like a shutter of an old camera. Your panic goes next level. You're stronger than I thought, Lila says with a satisfied yet blank stare. You run from the house, but as you cross the weedy, tangling lawn and reach the street, no Mr. Conklin in sight, your pace slows to a strut. By the time you walk through your front door, the afterbirth of recent events is expunged, and you can't quite remember what it is you're supposed to forget.
My studio audience, they have like this slight delay. It takes a minute.
I appreciate their feedback. I love it.
Very nice. Well, I know you are a busy woman, so last question. What is the life of PM Raymond like outside of writing?
Oh, goodness. Well, when I'm not writing, I love baking and cooking new recipes.
Do you make cheesecake?
Actually, no, I don't. I actually don't make cheesecake. But I do bake other cakes though. So I do like that. I love cooking. I have a ton of recipe books. And just spending time with friends, like going catch coffee with friends and, walking the neighborhood. I have a very walkable neighborhood and I live right near a skate park. And a softball diamond and a soccer field, like for the youths. So, it's very family oriented. So just always like walking around, and I can walk to my downtown area and grab coffee and stuff like that. So.
Very nice. Mm-hmm. Well, PM, it has been a pleasure talking with you.
Well, thank you for having me again. I really appreciate it.
So as we bring the show to a close, is there anything you'd like to plug or let your readers know about?
Yeah, I got a book coming. So it's going to be launching April 21st, and it's called Things Are As They Should Be, in Other Words to Die For. You can find links. It's already on pre-sale for Amazon and the print edition. And those links are at my website, which is pmraymond.com. Right on the front page, you'll find those. So that's coming. And then I will be making several appearances, starting with the Tennessee Williams Festival and New Orleans Literary Book Festival, March 25th to 29th. I'll be sitting on a panel there. I don't know what the name of the panel is yet. I just know that the panel is set and I'm on it. So I will be in New Orleans during that time. Then I'll be at Malice Domestics, which is April 27th through 29th in Bethesda, Maryland. And that's more of a crime mystery, like traditional mystery. But this book, I think, will do really well there. So I'll be at that. And then, of course, I'll be at StokerCon in June. So June 4th through 6th, I think. And that's in Pittsburgh. So that is my travel schedule. If you're in any of those areas, please stop by.
Nice. All right. Well, listeners at home, all those links are in the description. And PM, thank you again for joining me.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone who tuned in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Be sure to tune in next Tuesday for a new episode featuring the best and brightest authors and filmmakers of dark literature and film. So until then, stay healthy, stay sane, and as always, thank you for listening. See you next time.